This video is sponsored by Surfshark. More on that in a bit. Yes, what you have heard is true. In my video about the Holy Sexuality Project, the gay conversion curriculum by evangelist Christopher Yuan, I regrettably missed something pretty big, and I'm sorry that I didn't address it sooner.
I just received a large shipment of drugs, not my largest, but they confiscated all my money and the drugs I had, which the court noted was equivalent to 9.1 tons of marijuana.
9.1 tons of marijuana. So this guy was basically El Chapo. He was the Walter White of weed. He woke up one day and was really like, drug lord? No. More like, praise the Lord. Yeah, I guess I got so focused on analyzing the rhetorical strategy at play that I glossed over the fact that he claimed to have a 9-acre farm's worth in storage. The man was hoarding half the Earth's supply of natural gas. I did some number crunching, and if we assume that it was relatively mid and went for $2.50 an ounce like it does in my area, then we're talking about almost $73 million worth of product. Like, what?
I was gonna
develop a healthy and evidence-based view of sexuality.
before I got high.
Okay. All of this supposedly happened in the early 2000s, so those numbers would look pretty different than today, but still. Also, some commenters have said that certain courts quantify different substances in equivalent weight in marijuana using really antiquated ideas of how much weight from the plant typically comes with a certain amount of psychoactive substance. So he could have really just had a more moderate amount of hard stuff rather than like a whole grow-op. Anyway, my video responding to Yuan got a lot of attention, and it's given me more to share with you guys. I'll cover some of that, and at the end, I'm going to respond to a clip from the Holy Sexuality Project that I didn't include in the original video. Looking back on it, I probably should have, especially with how many people brought up the subject that he addresses that I didn't respond to. First off, to my surprise, Christopher Yuan has not responded to my video legally or otherwise. I definitely expected to have heard something by now because the last time I responded to a Christian course, the teacher, Greg Kokel, made a 2-part response to me, which just so happened to be one of the worst responses I think I've ever gotten.
Does he agree that it's wrong to gas Jews in the objective sense, but it's not wrong to gas termites? That's all I want to know.
How can you be in media production for so long and not realize that responding to the transcript of a video without watching it, clearly, is probably not a good idea, and you might end up completely misunderstanding points. But I digress. Also, one time I responded to a Christian song, this was years ago, and the ministry threatened to sue me for copyright infringement, which was a complete bluff. I kept the video up and basically was like, no, dude, you're lying. And yeah, they were. Didn't get taken down. And it's back up now, like 1 million views or something like that. Kind of embarrassing, it's so old. But yeah, I expected shenanigans, but no shenanigans so far. There's still time for Yuan to respond, but at this point, my video has already reached more people than his curriculum probably ever will. Let's hope some of those people were the young people forced to take his class. More on that later. I have a good guess for why Yuan hasn't responded yet, if in fact he plans to respond at all. Yuan has been busy visiting someone in Canada, his new fiancée.
Today is Dad's homegoing anniversary, and 2 years, 1 week ago, Dad made a spontaneous wish as he blew out his birthday candles. I'm here to announce that God is answering Dad's wish. On June 22nd, I got down on my knee and proposed to one of the most godly, beautiful, and capable women I've ever met. She's indescribably more than I could have ever hoped for or deserved. And can you believe it? Penny said yes. I look forward to introducing you to the woman that I love, cherish, and by God's grace will provide for, protect, and lay down my life. And what else? Not only did Penny get to meet Dad, she fell in love with Mom before me and calls Mom her 9-year-old. Penny is the epitome of a Proverbs 31 excellent wife who is far more precious than jewels. Rejoice with me as God continues to write our story as an example of the amazing power of God's saving and sanctifying grace. To God be the glory.
As a commenter reminded me, Yuan has been praying that God bring him a wife for a long time, so I'm sure Yuan sees this as somewhat miraculous. He's made it very clear in his previous work that he doesn't have attractions to women or identify as straight, but that he believes God can change that if he wills it. Remember this clip from my video?
If you've heard my testimony, I never talked about that I've turned straight. I mean, I'm not even dating anyone. So, I would say someone who turns straight is someone who's maybe married, has children. That obviously isn't part of my story.
So now that Yuan better fits his definition of someone who has turned straight, I wonder how he'll present his testimony from this point on. Regardless of exactly how he describes his orientation or attractions, I'm sure he and his Christian community will uphold his marriage as a sign of God's approval and intervention in his life. While he says,
heterosexuality is the right direction, not the right goal.
The fact that he is signaling heterosexuality through his marriage will no doubt serve as the ultimate sign of his success as a formerly gay Christian. Now, I know that for some of you watching, your immediate reaction to Yuan's engagement announcement is to think, ugh, that poor woman, this is obviously a sham marriage. Yuan just needs to accept himself and leave others out of his repression. I get that, I really do. But I want to encourage you to go deeper here, both in reason and compassion. It's unfortunate that Yuan can't marry the gender he's attracted to in his religion, and his extreme, shame-filled sexual ethics are unhealthy. That's clear. It's also apparent that those ethics motivated him to seek a wife in the first place. With that said, though, we know very little about the relationship between Yuan and his new fiancée, and calling it a fraud, sham, loveless, or doomed to fail is an overstep, if you ask me. Even if Yuan is not attracted to women, they can still have a bond that's valuable to them. People everywhere, perhaps especially in queer communities, find deep connection and love in relationships with people they're not attracted to in that way. For both of their sakes, I hope this is the case for Yuan and his fiancée. I don't know if it is, but I can't discount that possibility. So I genuinely wish them a happy and healthy marriage. Now, if in the future Yuan does what John Paulk did back in the day and claims, I've turned totally straight, my ex-lesbian wife and I are super hot for each other, you can turn straight too, I will see his relationship very differently. It's possible, though, that Yuan and his future wife are on the same page about him not wanting to have sex. Let's hope that's the case, and that they're not expecting God to change Yuan's sexuality once they say I do. Basically, guys, let's not draw conclusions prematurely, but instead do our best to think complexly and compassionately about the issue. Yuan certainly doesn't do this himself, and if we criticize him, that goes a lot further if we do so in a way which clearly rises above his approach. Okay, next up, some interesting inside info on the world of Yuan's ministry. But first, a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, Surfshark. Surfshark is a virtual private network that protects your online identity and safeguards the information sent to and from your device over the internet, which prevents large companies and data brokers from using your private info. Surfshark also keeps your data safe from any would-be hackers when you're connected to public Wi-Fi, say while you're working in a cafe or while traveling. Surfshark also allows you to change the location of your device. This gives you access to content libraries and streaming services from anywhere in the world, and it can help you find better deals on accommodations and tickets when you're traveling. As I record this, I'm getting ready to go out of the country for vacation, but I want to keep watching the show I've been watching, Vikings, on US Netflix. Fortunately, with Surfshark, I can still access this show just by changing my device's location. You can get an excellent Surfshark deal if you use my code SKEPTIC. Plus, you'll get an extra 4 months for free. Surfshark offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk to try it. Just click my link in the description or pinned comment to check it out. Okay, some insider info. Remember Yuan's story about his friend Mark, who was gay but then developed attractions to a woman and married her? Well, I got a comment from a friend of mine who I trust and has a little bit of a journalism background, actually. That's Godless Granny. She has actually met Yuan and Mark's wife. I've met these people. When Yuan's book came out, I was a church librarian. I had lunch with him and his mother at a church librarians conference in Wheaton and bought his book for our church. The woman in the story about the couple where he was gay was there too. She said her husband was still gay. She was the only woman he was attracted to. She said when they go out, she never has to worry about his eyes roving to other women, but he did sometimes eye other men. He's clearly still gay. Yeah, this is what I and many of my viewers suspected because we're informed enough to know that gay people can't just change. Yuan purposely targets sheltered young people with his course, though, so he's able to successfully present a conversion narrative with Mark's story. According to Godless Granny, though, Yuan was there when Mark's wife said he was still gay. Yuan knew this years ago, but still intentionally presented Mark's story as an example of someone who God changed and blessed with holy desires. So not only did Yuan craftily tell a story with a conversion narrative while simultaneously distancing himself from failed conversion ministries, but he did so while knowing that the subject of his story was still gay. Isn't there something in the Bible, like a commandment or something, that's against, lying? On to another comment. I used to do video production for Christian evangelical ministries. Sorry. It's okay, Beard Thor, we'll forgive you. I wanted to point out possibly the least important thing about this course. There is no fucking way this cost $1.2 million to make, not even a tenth of that. It sticks out to me like a sore thumb because I know exactly how to do this type of product. Saying it should be $300 is strictly marketing and has zero basis in reality. The donations don't make it cheaper as digital distribution is practically free. I would know that. This is tax-free bullshit and people in charge banked nearly all of that price tag. Thank you for your honesty there, Beard Thor. Appreciate it. That's what I thought too, given my production experience and my proximity to ministry throughout my life, honestly. It's really common for big, fancy evangelical churches to volunteer filming locations and equipment for stuff like this, so it's not unlikely that they filmed this whole thing for basically the cost of labor alone. If that. That would leave animation, editing, music licensing, web design, and site hosting, and I agree that $1.2 million cost for that seems incredibly unlikely. As many commenters on my video said, it appears that Yuan went from distributing one kind of poison in his life of crime to peddling another kind of poison through the web of lies he calls ministry. A final note on the comments, I've gotten a lot from kids saying their parents or their school is forcing them to take Yuan's course. One young commenter even said that when they came out to their mom, she said, "It was the witchcraft I did as a teenager that made you this way. There's a demonic spirit of homosexuality attached to you now. I've failed both of my children." Yuan's work and Christian authorities' efforts to force it on kids is absolutely a form of abuse and can rightfully be called grooming. Several commenters pointed that out and were right to do so. I'd like to add that this ideology is also a product of abuse itself. It's kind of a generational curse. Yuan got into drugs and later into ministry for the same reason. His parents gave him a disgustingly abusive ultimatum. You can choose being gay or your family. They then disowned him. As many young people will do when treated in this way, and I would know having worked with queer teens in a group home before my YouTube days, he lived dangerously as a means of coping, but eventually suffered the consequences. Then he turned to complete submission to abusive authorities as a means of escaping the pain of his situation. Finally, he became an abusive authority himself as a means of absolution, perpetuating the cycle of abuse. My young commenter's mom exemplifies this too. She once engaged in spiritual practices outside of the power structure of Christianity. She was then punished through indoctrination, which guilted her for destroying her child's life. And then she forced her child into an abusive program in an attempt at redemption. This kind of abuse goes well beyond any parent or any minister. It is a self-perpetuating cycle which is not broken simply through the scorn of individual abusers. Only widespread knowledge of the facts on sexuality, religious psychology, and the cycle itself can slow the cycle down. Now, finally, let's look at a part of Yuan's course that I didn't respond to in the original video. Several commenters remarked that Yuan didn't say anything about asexual people, but he actually did.
Sexuality is not who you are, but what you feel and do. So gay, lesbian, bi, even straight, really should not be used to describe people, but our feelings and actions. In the past few years, I've had several teenage girls come to me with a major concern, pull me aside and whisper, "I think I'm asexual." And I whisper back, "Why?" "Because I don't have any sexual desires." And I say, "Okay, let me tell you what that means. You're a teenage girl." Actually, I know some adult women who married without having any sexual desires, and it can often develop later. Nothing strange. Our culture is so hyper-sexualized that teenage girls without sexual desires are deemed abnormal. So listen carefully. Don't make the presence or absence of sexual desires, or any desire for that matter, who you are. Let me say again. The presence or absence of sexual desires doesn't make you who you are.
When these teenage girls come to him concerned that they're abnormal for not having sexual desires, doesn't Yuan's reassurance of, "Don't worry, you will develop sexual desires, so you're not actually abnormal," rely on the premise that not having sexual desires is abnormal and cause for concern? If you really want to reassure these girls that they're not abnormal in not having sexual desires, shouldn't you say, "That's okay, regardless of whether you do or don't develop them, it's nothing to be ashamed of"? Of course, Yuan can't do that because he is the one who actually thinks asexuality is abnormal and outside of God's allosexual heteronormative plan. Also, the fact that he knows women who got married even though they didn't have sexual desires doesn't really support the idea that asexuality will change with marriage and that the relationship will develop into a heteronormative allosexual relationship. Yuan and his community think gay people should get straight married, and we know that doesn't change them sexually. With such a strong pressure on people to get straight married in his community, people likely get married against their best interest all the time. To clarify, asexual people can totally have healthy marriages. You can have a thriving relationship with someone without sex, or with sex that you don't necessarily feel the same drive for as an allosexual person. As long as you can have honest, open communication about your wants and needs, creating a healthy relationship is possible. Yuan's ideology, though, does not allow for the communication that an asexual person would need to have a healthy marriage, starting with the idea that anything but allosexual heteronormativity is sinful is not exactly conducive to healthy communication about your wants and needs. Finally, I think the following statement reveals Yuan's fundamental misunderstanding of labels for sexual and gender minorities.
Our culture is so hyper-sexualized that teenage girls without sexual desires are deemed abnormal.
The idea that being asexual is abnormal or non-ideal actually comes from Yuan's community, as I've shown. Likewise, the idea that labels like asexual, queer, or gay are meant to denote the abnormality and essentiality of these identities also comes from his community. One of the reasons labels for gender and sexual variations exist is to normalize them. Christian fundamentalists like to call people gay and queer as a way to say you're weird and wrong, yes, but queer people and their allies use these words to say this orientation or identity is an understood and valid way of being for lots of people. I mean, LGBTQ people literally reclaimed the word queer as a way of taking a weapon of marginalization away from bigots. They literally changed a word used against them into a word that they use to normalize their existence. I really can't make it any clearer for you than that, Yuan. Queer labels and categories are also not meant to be taken as transcendent, at least not in the communities that I'm aware of or friendly with, I suppose. They're not essentialist categories like man and woman are for Christians. There is not an objective standard for asexual, queer, gay, or any other label, and there really isn't meant to be. These are categories made to facilitate communication and self-expression. I say this because if I were in Yuan's situation where a concerned teenager told me, I think I'm asexual, I would not assert that they shouldn't think of themselves as asexual because they might possibly develop different feelings later. I'd first ask them why they think that's the case, why they're concerned, and address that. Then I'd say, it's okay if you don't feel sexual attraction. That's nothing to worry about or be ashamed of. Sexual feelings can develop at different ages for different people. You might feel differently at some point, you might not, but regardless, it's okay. I'd then ask if they like or identify with the label asexual and assure them that they can choose to use the label or not, regardless of whether they always feel the way they do right now. It's just a word you can use to describe yourself if you want to, I'd say. Nothing more or less. Despite what Yuan says about queer people in our hypersexualized culture, it's really him that thinks the labels we use for ourselves must be objective, essentialist categories that describe the very core of our being. He's simply projecting his own unhealthy obsession with sex and identity onto everyone else. All right, that's all I've got for you today. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic. Thank you guys for watching. I mean, if you watched the 2.5 hour long video on this and then watched the end of this, then yeah, wow. Thank you very much. Remember to check out my sponsor, Surfshark, by clicking the link in the description and pinned comment. A special thanks to my patrons for their constant love and support. If you want to hear more from me, subscribe. As always, if you are an apostate in need, there are resources linked in the description to help you find community and mental health support. Remember to be kind to others in the comments, and until next time, stay skeptical.